So today I want to touch on the experiences that we've seen with open banking, both in Australia and the UK, but to also raise the big questions, I think, for this sector, which is where should it be the same and where should it be different? And what's that going to practically look like for this for the CDRs in the energy sector? So just starting with open banking, it's interesting to look to the UK and their experience because open banking started in the UK in January last year. They had about 14 months to put in place open banking, or the start of open banking in that sector. And a couple of interesting observations I'd make about how that's been working in practice is the real success that we've seen with some of the services and products that have come out of the open banking regime in the UK have been where they've centred on there being a really clear product available for the consumer, that it helps the consumer experience, and that it's pretty simple. So I think it's a lesson for potential third-party service providers in this sector to perhaps not try to overcomplicate the service or the product that you're offering. The other thing that we've seen out of open banking in the UK is just because you put this regime in place doesn't mean people will take it up. 1 in 7 small to medium-sized enterprises are not yet using it. This was about November last year, but there are 25% of the people that KPMG surveyed who said they're never going to use it. They're never going to trust another financial provider or third party to use that information. We've got a role, I think, to change those stats. And I think that's something that we need to bear in mind in looking at the CDR regime that's being developed for this sector. So I suppose some of the learnings from the UK have been taken into account in developing the open banking system in Australia. Was forecast to start with the 4 banks 1st of July, now being pushed back slightly with a pilot starting this year and implementation starting early next year. I think the banks would say, again, similar to the UK, not enough time, but they've certainly had a challenge in that, unlike many changes in regulation, they haven't been able to see the regulation, they haven't been able to see the rules, and they haven't been able to see the data standards all in a completed form and then go out and build those new systems and processes and work out where the opportunities are. They've had to do it in conjunction with Treasury, in conjunction with the ACCC and with Data 61. They've had to take a bit of a punt about what it's going to look like, both for the first CDR and for future CDRs, and try to build something with that flexibility. Not that easy. And I think that's a little bit where the energy sector is. You're not going to have, if you're a retailer or if you're a potential service provider, you're not going to have enough time to really get this done in the optimal way to take advantage of this new right. You're not going to have enough time, you're not going to have enough visibility of exactly what it's going to look like. So within those parameters, I think it becomes really important that everybody within the sector, all of the range of stakeholders, start getting involved in those big decisions, start being involved actively in the consultation process. And I know a number of the people in this room have been part of that, but I think as we're starting to look at this sector, not the open banking or not the financial services sector, what is it that should be the same and what is it that should be different? So just I suppose looking at Daniel's comments around one of the objectives of the CDR system is not to be unique to a particular sector, but to take advantage of some of the efficiencies and allow consumers to understand what that consumer data right means. We have to have some consistency. So I know that this sector will advocate that it's different. We all like to be special, but I think to the extent that we can adopt something that is sensible and efficient. Where it makes sense, we should be looking at the same approach across all sectors and across all CDRs. Accreditation seems to be a pretty simple one, but of course one of the debates is, if you're accredited in banking, does that mean that you'll automatically be accredited for the telco sector and the energy sector? I think this forum can certainly see advantages of that, but there'll be others that debate whether that's appropriate. A lot of the privacy and security safeguards that are embedded in the legislation and then have been put into the rules framework for banking makes sense, in my view, to also apply to this sector. So again, I think a pragmatic view about is there a real reason, is there something different about this sector? There will be, and I'll touch on that in a minute, but let's try to limit those so that this can be put in place relatively efficiently. And I think this sector will also benefit from the phased approach that banking has adopted. Unlike a lot of rule changes, I think there's an opportunity to have a bit of a go with the CDR regime, to put in place something that is relatively simple to start with and then develop further CDRs and the complexity of other CDRs as we go. And I think there's an opportunity in this industry, this sector, to do the same. So bigger questions are what needs to be different? Clearly, there are some unique arrangements about households and, how we're going to manage a request from somebody who's not actually the account holder, how we're going to manage requests for even particularly minors and their access to data. We've talked a little bit already about the scope of the data sets. There's going to be plenty of debate around what is the right data set, and I like the idea of looking at what's actually going to be effective to help a consumer, and coming from that perspective rather than perhaps the retailers and others saying what's easy or what's convenient for them. What's going to make this a meaningful right? And certainly that's going to be a range of data, not just the metadata. The debate in this area will of course be around value-added data, or derived data is the term used in the legislation. What is it that has had some extra IP and investment attached to it, so shouldn't be part of the consumer data right, even though it might benefit the consumer? So what's going to be in and out is going to be a big issue. We've touched on consent already in some of the discussions and the authorisation processes. I think there's going to be a lot of debate around what consent means in this industry, but hopefully we can utilise some of the mechanisms that are already in place. And for me as a lawyer, I think it's a huge challenge, and a challenge that we need to be up for, to move away from Michael's complicated 4 pages that none of us, not even me as a privacy lawyer, want to read, and have something simple and have that honest conversation with the consumer about what they are actually consenting to. Finally, I suppose the question is, what does this all mean from a practical perspective in terms of the implementation of the first consumer data right in this sector? Bunch of stuff for both data recipients and data holders about managing risk and new systems. Don't underestimate that there is a fair bit to do there, a fair few conversations to be had. Hopefully, when it comes to that question of customer churn, it becomes a meaningful moving from retailer to retailer based on good quality data and good outcomes for the consumer. I think we've got to talk about the cost and try to make this as efficient as possible so that it doesn't become a huge burden. But I think the largest challenge, coming back to that experience with the UK, is not just to put in place a consumer data right that sits there, but a consumer data right that the broader community sees value in and trusts the participants that they won't misuse their data, they will use their data in accordance with what's been promised.